Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of your Bish Therapist podcast. My name is Melissa Reich, and I am your Bish Therapist. Today is going to be the final thoughts and interpretations of the Bethany and Raquel interview and sit down. My episode 2, if you haven't heard it yet, you probably want to go ahead and hear that first. I apologize for leaving everybody hanging. I was going to try to talk about all parts of it in one podcast. It was just a little too long, and so I didn't want to torture everybody about that. So today what I'm going to do is I am going to give my clinical interpretations and my thoughts based on the second and third interview with Bethany and Rachel. So where we left off last time was we had covered episode 1. I gave my overarching thoughts about the whole thing, some good things that Bethany and Rachel did, some missteps, shared with you a little bit of definition about, the treatment facility and things that she would have accomplished in treatment based on what she said. So just to give you a little overview there. Today, the topics that I'm going to cover are very important topics of HIPAA and Americans with Disabilities Act, mental health advocacy, and the like. The reason that I feel the need to talk about that is Rachel and Bethany had made some claims, interesting claims about HIPAA and Andy and breaking HIPAA and things like that. And so it was clear to me that Rachel and Bethany didn't have a good idea of what HIPAA is, which, fair enough. Professionals need to be aware of it because it's part of our clinical practice. You have to have awareness and concerns about private health information, PHI, private and protected health information. Part of therapy is obviously confidentiality and keeping things private. So, therapists have to become really well acquainted with these topics. And since they were kind of talked about in the interview in ways that was confusing, I am here to clear that up for you. So let's get right into it. Before I talk about the HIPAA and the mental health advocacy of it all, I want to start out by saying, one of the things that struck me in episode 2 was Rachel talked about her experience and just not feeling safe. Her and her family were receiving death threats and things like that. And so I just want to give a little PSA here as a human. Can we not? You can be mad at somebody without hurting them or throwing something at them or threatening to harm them or kill them. That is so wild to me. If someone's behavior makes you so angry that you are threatening to harm them or someone they love, I think that's really something that needs to be looked at. It is possible to be angry and to dislike Rachel, to find what she did reprehensible, but to do things like that to her and her family, it's just not acceptable at all. The second thing that I wanted to comment on is that, she talked about not feeling safe. I've seen some things online kind of mocking her. And, as a therapist who, for me, if you've listened to me, you know that what I'm about is human rights. And especially with marginalized communities, for me, that is just one of the absolute most important parts of my job, is to advocate for people who are unable to advocate for themselves. So when Rachel says that she doesn't feel safe, period, end of sentence, we don't get to have a different opinion about that because that's her experience. And who are we to tell her that she shouldn't feel that way? She doubled down on the Sheena punch of it all, or as Rachel said, which was kind of a funny way to say it, that Sheena socked her in the eye, pushed her and threw her phone. Listen, being cheated on, for those of us who have experienced it, in the past, obviously not, my husband is amazing. We have a beautiful relationship. But if you've ever been in a relationship where you've been cheated on, you're hurt, and if we had a national platform like Ariana did, um, do I think Ariana and the group went too far with it? Sure, I do. But do I also understand why they did? Yeah. I mean, imagine your worst breakup if you had the entire world behind you. If you don't think that would get to your head a little bit, I think we're wrong about that. I understand why it got to Ariana's head a little bit, but and Sheena and to the rest of the group. But just to reiterate, putting your hands on someone is just never okay. It's just not acceptable. And so I don't know. I think we're close to the truth of what happened. Sheena shared her truth. She talked about how she can't make a fist because of her nails, blah, blah, blah. I get it. I think that these people have done things and said things to Rachel that now, in the hindsight of sanity and calmness, that they probably regret. So, just I want everyone to know that Rachel is a human who's deserving of happiness. I think most humans are deserving of happiness, unless people are super evil and awful people. I don't mean those people, but Rachel's a human being. So let's just leave that where it is. It was interesting because Bethany didn't ask a lot of follow-up questions or critical questions, meaning, as an interviewer and as a therapist, right, part of my clinical practice is assessment, and I'm a really good assessor. And what assessing is just asking a lot of questions, and it's asking questions from different angles so that you might get more from people than, if you ask a question that's a yes or no, a closed question versus an open question, which is tell me about, or, can you share with me? So I just didn't love Bethany's interview style. It seemed very self-serving, in my opinion. But Bethany, the one thing she did challenge Rachel on, which was, well, people will say you signed up for this. And Rachel's response was, I thought reality TV would be fun. Okay, fine. But anyone with any sort of awareness about what reality TV is knows that it's certainly not fun. It's a job, it's toxic, even in the best of situations. It's not fun. You hear a lot of housewives and people on Bravo and in reality talk about how it had, being on TV negatively impacted their mental, physical, spiritual health, what have you. So for me, when Rachel says, well, I thought it would be fun, your lack of awareness doesn't preclude you from taking accountability and ownership of the decision that you made, right? So, she blames Bravo and producers and things, but at the same time, what I know, as a therapist, but also, I have my own therapist, I have a lot of health issues. We have to be our own best advocate. Nobody's going to do it for us. Nobody. Not your boss, not your family, not, your doctors, your whatever. You have to be your own best advocate. So I think that that's something that maybe comes with a little bit of wisdom and experience and age. I am a lot older than Rachel, but I think that that's, for me, a really important piece of this to share is, we make decisions and then we experience consequences for those decisions, and then we have to adjust accordingly. And we are the only people responsible for that. Bethany did a lot of talking about how Rachel was treated in general. And there was this segment where she read off all the awful things that, people said to her at their reunion. And Bethany cries. And for me, this appeared very inauthentic. It appeared to me like Bethany was trying to manufacture kind of like a Dr. Phil moment, but in my opinion, she lacked the emotional depth and ability to really get there. I think that Bethany's tears, I said this in the last episode, I think her tears were more about her own projection. But I do think that Bethany, has empathy for Rachel, and she certainly treated her kindly. So, I will certainly give her credit for that. But that moment for me specifically felt a little bit inauthentic. Bethany, of course, took the opportunity to pat herself on the back, which, fine. Being your own best advocate sometimes means giving yourself props. Again, no shade in that, but it seems like Bethany, the way she does it is very self-focused. And she talked about the Bethany clause, which for people who didn't listen or don't know what that means, is that Bethany started Skinny Girl on Bravo, and Bravo ended up putting in a clause that if you are promoting a business on Housewives or on Bravo, you have to kick up a percentage from your personal business to Bravo. I assume she knows what she's talking about there. I know nothing about that, but she credits herself with enacting that change to the Bravo universe, which again, it just felt a little bit self-serving, but that's fine. The part that irritated me is when, Bethany and Rachel were talking about how successful everyone has been in the Vanderpump Rules universe adjacent to this. And they're right about that, right? Lala was able to buy a house in Palm Springs from the Send It to Daryl sweatshirts, and they have all, the sandwich shop, and just Tom's Band and all these other things. They all benefited in some way. And of course, so did Bravo. I mean, Bethany, the one thing that she did during this part of the interview is she discussed and shared the ratings for the part 3 of the Vanderpump reunion. And it was staggering. It definitely did give you a sense of, wow, there are some people in upper management who made a killing off of the backs of these people. So, in that aspect, the reality reckoning is very real. What I think people get lost in is that I think the reality reckoning is real and human rights are being trampled. And I think it's a good thing that needs to change. But two things can be true. That can be true. And Bethany can also be kind of self-serving and frustrating and contradictory. So I don't want the whole reality reckoning to get lost in the sauce, because I do think things need to change. But going back to what irritated me about what they said is that, they both had kind of lamented that, well, Rachel was the only one to not profit, to rack up debt because she went to treatment, and now her reputation is tarnished. And my response to that is a you problem. Okay. Now, did Bravo, exploit? Well, sure, but that's Bravo's whole format, to be clear. I mean, exploiting women and not paying them super well and using their images in perpetuity forever. I mean, that's the reason for this whole thing. So that's not the same as Rachel saying, well, now I'm in debt from this treatment and I'm not making any money. Well, you created that, right? I mean, side note, and I did say this in one of my other podcasts, treatment, mental, physical, or otherwise, should not cost an arm and a leg. You shouldn't have to be in debt and sell a house or go into medical debt to get yourself good treatment. That is some serious bullshit. The medical system is broken. I'm going to be honest about that. However, Rachel chose to carry out an affair on TV, on a show that she knew, you know, it would come to light, it would come to fruition. Those were her choices. So taking accountability for me, I can tell when that Rachel is, there's some growth there, but there needs to be more. Because lamenting about how you're not profiting off of this is just, as PK would say, it's not a good look, babe. It's just not. So, you know, I think that if she, you know, wants to start a podcast and, you know, profit off of sharing her experience, strength, and hope with others, which is, you know, in the program of AA and in a lot of treatment facilities, they follow a 12-step a guideline. And with sex and love addiction, there is a 12-step program called Sex and Love Addiction Anonymous, or Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. So from the language that she was using, it told me as a therapist that she probably really was encouraged by people in the treatment center to share her experience, strength, and hope with others. So if that's what she wants to use her podcast for, great. But, you know, and of course, do we all want to make a living and do we want to make money? Yes. But I just think, you know, there's some contradictory bits in that piece of it for me. Let's see. Oh, one thing they discussed was the spinoff and the hypocrisy of it, and I fully agree with it. So for those of you who don't know, Stassi, Jax, Brittany, and Kristen Doty were fired the season before Scandival for some things that they did, and to be honest, I'm not exactly sure. I think it was racially motivated, kind of racist statements or things like that. I'm not totally sure, so I'm not going to act as if I know for sure, but they did something negative regarding race. And then they made comments about, you know, after the scandal of it all, they are all given this redemption arc to come back in the spinoff. And what Rachel and Bethany were saying is accurate in terms of, you know, it is kind of hypocritical. They were just fired for behavior that the network deemed made them unemployable. And now they're walking back on it and employing them seemingly for the bottom dollar, right? So I do think they had a point there. Here's where I'm going to use the word alleged a lot, and I'm going to talk about what Rachel said about James because I don't want to get myself in hot water. But Rachel believes the spinoff is a way to silence Kristen about her allegations that she made against James. Okay, so Kristen Doty made allegations that James was emotionally, verbally, and physically abusive to her, and that there was one event allegedly that was caught on camera but wasn't included in the show, according to Kristen. Bethany and Rachel discuss a cover-up involving Bravo trying to bury the lead to make money to keep the show going. Now, what's interesting is I was on Instagram yesterday and Kristen Doty shared a message. She came forward and she said some of what Rachel said was accurate about her and James. Now, she didn't say specifically what was accurate and what wasn't, but Rachel reported seeing James be quote unquote a violent person, and she believes Kristen Doty. Here's what I'm going to say about that because I do have to be careful. The observable behavior that James displayed on the show from season 1 to last season has been atrocious. I don't understand why people adore him. The, you know, arguments that he has gotten on with people in the show have certainly, from my clinical observation, have been verbally abusive, hands down, without a doubt. I can't speak to the physicality. I can't speak to that, but I can tell you what I've seen is abusive behavior from him, and that's what he was willing to show on TV. So for me, when people are willing to show really, really strong behavior that's really inappropriate, if they're willing to show that on TV, my clinical question is what's happening behind the scenes, right? If this is what you're willing to show, then wow, that's quite a threshold. Um, so I thought that was all very interesting. But again, I think Bethany and Rachel are trying to use these points to make their case stronger. And the two are apples and oranges. That's just my thought on that. So the last part of part 2 that I want to talk about before I move on to HIPAA and all of that is Bethany talked about her therapist, Dr. Matt Polowitz. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I do follow him on Instagram. He doesn't really have a huge page. He's not very big on Instagram. But again, I wanted to do my actual research and I looked him up. So he has his PsyD, which is a doctorate of psychology. It's different from a PhD, but you can, write prescriptions and, make diagnoses and do all the things essentially that psychiatrists do. I think the only difference, is, if I'm wrong, please correct me, but I don't know if people with PsyD have admitting privileges in hospitals like someone with a PhD does. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm going to do my homework and then I'll get back to you on that. So Bethany asked her therapist to watch the reunion and give his thoughts. So I found that interesting because I was thinking to myself, if I had a notable client and they asked me to, watch something, that's not out of the realm of inappropriate. If something's important to a client and they want you to see it, they want you to watch it, listen to it. Absolutely. I've done that a million times. What is interesting to me is that he gave her feedback, and I don't know if he gave her permission to air it or if she just did. I don't know how comfortable I would feel with that because, at the end of my podcast, I do a disclaimer, to keep from getting sued because essentially I am able to clinically, diagnose, but it's inappropriate to do it through armchair psychology. If you have a client in front of you, that's a different story. Watching people on TV and watching a snippet is far different from observing somebody in person and truly accurately assessing them. So I don't know if he can get in a bit of trouble for that. I'm not sure, but apparently what he said was that he talked about the difference between punishment and abuse. And he's right about that. So again, we can all dislike Rachel and be really angry with her, but the behavior that was showed to her at the reunion was so abusive. I mean, the name calling, the rage, and, just the pure seething anger. Again, I get it. I understand why Ariana and the rest of the crew were angry. Understandable. But again, you can be angry without verbally eviscerating somebody. And I think that, everyone just wanted to step up to the plate and just boom, 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 just verbally eviscerate her. And she sat there and she took it, I'll give her credit for that. But from a therapist perspective, of course, that's not appropriate. From a fan perspective, fans loved to see it. Fans were like, yeah, like burn her at the stake. So for me as a fan and a therapist, I fall somewhere in the middle. Was it entertaining? I mean, for me, I don't get super entertained by really mean, angry, aggressive stuff. That's not what rocks my socks. But I understand why for some people it was entertaining. Bethany, here's what frustrated me. She started to reference studies about emotional abuse and started to give a definition, but she clearly Googled it and was just reading from Google the definition of emotional abuse. And again, as a clinician, I don't like that because psychology is not just something that any person can just speak on. There's theories and tenets, and there's an art to it as well. So I think that Bethany kind of overreached in her competency. Like we all have limitations with competency. There are people who have really, like, when you start off in the field and they have a really significant background, and you're not don't have experience and you're not trained for that. I think as a therapist, and just as a human, it's good to know your limitations. We all have them, and that's just part of being human. There are some areas that I won't treat because I don't you know I don't feel incredibly competent to do so. For example, people with psychotic disorders, schizophrenia, things like that, that, if I can be honest, that's not my wheelhouse. So I think that Bethany was trying to be like an armchair psychologist, and I just didn't like it, personally. But the one thing that the therapist noted, which was true, is that, what he asked Bethany's like, I was confused about what the goal was of this reunion. It seemed like there was no conflict resolution as a goal. And I was like, well, of course not, because reality TV and actual real life being a person are two totally different things. So, yeah, there was no goal of conflict resolution there. It was, let's eviscerate this person for ratings, let's all make some money, and then Vanderpump Rules is saved. So, I have a lot of feelings about that, but I just don't, I would love to hear from him. I would love to hear from Dr. Polowitz, if I'm saying that right. If he ever contacted me, I'd be happy to have him on my podcast. But to be determined about that. Now, let me get to part 3 before I talk too much and make this too long also. I'm going to explain what HIPAA is. And, Rachel talked about wanting a mental health advocate that wasn't given to her. So I'm going to really clearly lay out, what are these concepts? How would that have impacted her? And, just kind of like everything having to do with that. So HIPAA stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which was enacted in 1996. It was President Clinton at the time signed the bill into law, and essentially it is a federal law that required the creation of national standards to protect sensitive patient health information from being disclosed without the patient's consent or knowledge. HIPAA treats mental health information the same as any other health information. So there's not separate HIPAA for mental health versus, physical health. The laws and regulations around it can sometimes vary from state to state. So despite this being a law for national standards, the caveat is each state has its own requirements regarding how patient medical information should be kept private and secure. And some states do it better than others. I live in the state of Pennsylvania, and so what we're talking about is the state of California. I can't speak to those laws because I'm not completely familiar with them. But California, what I do know is that the governor has really had a great focus on mental health. And if you just do a quick Google search, if you Google HIPAA California, it will tell you all of the mental health initiatives that California is trying to enact or trying to uphold. And it's beautiful. It's wonderful. Again, the LGBTQIA plus community, other people with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, people of color, any sort of marginalized communities, I am here to advocate for all of them. So HIPAA, to be clear, is something that only professionals can break. So I'm going to explain this and then follow up. So it generally prohibits healthcare providers and healthcare businesses called covered entities from disclosing protected information to anyone other than a patient or the patient's authorized representatives without their consent. It doesn't restrict patients from receiving information about themselves. Typically, there's always caveats, but if patients voluntarily share their health information, they don't get confidentiality if they have voluntarily shared it. So if, for example, Rachel talked about when she went into treatment, one of her peers was in treatment and recognized her. And Rachel proceeded to fill her in on everything, tell her everything that had been happening on the outside about Scandival and what was going on with her. And then the person that she told left treatment and then spilled the beans. Well, that happens all the time, unfortunately, in treatment. I used to work in an inpatient residential treatment facility for alcohol and substance abuse. And that happens all the time. People see people in treatment facilities, other patients, other clients, and they go and they tell people, so our best advice is always to people listening to this. If you are going to treatment or thinking about it, well, A, do it. It's the best thing you'll ever do. But B, you have to be mindful of who you tell what to, especially if you're a notable person. The therapist, the facility, if they had made a comment about her being, at their treatment facility, that would have absolutely broken HIPAA and they would have been held liable, and you can get fines, you can get shut down. It's, there's a lot of different rules and regulations regarding that. And it varies state by state. But that was on Rachel, when sharing very deeply personal, and listen, I get it. She was probably like so relieved to see a friendly face who wasn't just screaming at her and telling her to screw off. I understand why she did it, but that's not a HIPAA violation. Now to address what Rachel said about Andy. Andy commented on feeling that Rachel was medicated at the reunion, and Rachel took umbrage to that, which, to be honest, I did as well, because for me, it's a fine line. Yes, I talk about mental health issues and things like that, but I try to do it from a perspective of learning and growing and educating. And Andy, I think he just kind of flippantly made the comment. Other people's treatment plan is none of our business. Now, Rachel's sharing her treatment plan, so I'm going to share what she shared. But for me, talking about someone's medication or treatment plan, especially as technically her boss, I felt was, he probably just got caught up in the moment of all of it and said it, and I'm sure he regrets saying it. Maybe he doesn't, I don't know. But Andy cannot break HIPAA because he is not her healthcare practitioner. There is a caveat here that I'm going to talk about in a second, because Andy is technically her employer, which Bethany pointed out. But here's the thing, Andy was giving his opinion. Okay. So as a therapist doing this podcast, being a therapist and having this platform doesn't preclude me from having an opinion. Okay. So I'm a human being who has opinions, but, so I think Andy, it was the same situation. He's her boss. He's, a Bravo executive, but he was sharing an opinion. And while I didn't love it, he certainly wasn't violating any sort of HIPAA. But here's where it gets a little wonky, and I'm going to explain why. Rachel stated that a mental health advocate was promised to her to be with her in the trailer the day of the taping. Now, a mental health advocate, let me be clear what that is that can be anybody. It can be a therapist, but it also can be a family member. It can be a professional mental health advocate. But to be a mental health advocate, again, this varies state by state. You don't necessarily have to have educational requirements. It just requires you to be present and to advocate for the person at hand. Okay. So I think that I was surprised when I watched the Vanderpump Rules, all the reunion, that she didn't have someone there. I was kind of surprised by that. But what she's claiming is that she was supposed to have a mental health advocate there, and then the day before the taping, they took it away. She believes as a punishment for doing that interview outside the nail salon where people kind of teased her for looking like ET. Which I don't make fun of people's looks. That's really usually not how I roll. So I don't love that. But that is what she was claiming. Here's where this can get a little bit sticky. So a mental health advocate is a person who provides support to those with mental illness. Now, the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA for short, defines a disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more life activities. When an employee has a mental health condition that meets that criteria, they have workplace rights under the ADA. So this is a gray area that could possibly, if what Rachel's saying is true, if Bravo did that and didn't cover themselves, they could be, in trouble for that because of, what I just said. So I'm going to explain that accommodations are a change in the work environment or in the way things are customarily done that enables an individual with a disability to enjoy equal employment opportunities. And that's really important. So employers must provide reasonable accommodations to applicants and workers with psychiatric disabilities and other disabilities unless this causes undue hardship. Ultimately, the employer decides which accommodation will be used, but employees should have a voice in this decision. So I'm just sharing that. I know it's a little bit confusing. You may have to rewind and listen to this, a million times. But also, I love that I just said rewind. Am I 100 years old? There's no rewinding anymore. But, I grew up in the 80s. Give me a break. So I do think that, unfortunately, people who fall under this category with the ADA and, needing accommodations, I've seen it happen over and over that people they don't get it. And I don't know if the loophole is that employers need to provide accommodations unless it causes hardship. So I guess if they can prove that they tried and there was no one available or it caused some sort of hardship, I guess they could skirt responsibility. But instead of getting into the details and semantics of it, I just want to say that, Vanderpump Rules probably would have been canceled, according to Alex Baskin, without this whole scandal. So if you're going to utilize somebody's story and it's going to create a situation for them that they need to end up getting treatment, ethically, I believe that Bravo for sure could have done way better. Period. Point blank. Legally, again, any of my Bish lawyers listening to this, please reach out. And, again, I'll try to get someone on the show to maybe revisit this from the legal perspective, because that's the part I'm not sure about. So I'm sure Bravo, they have enough lawyers and money to make sure, and double check that what they're doing is legal. So it may not have been illegal, but I'm going to say it was absolutely unethical. She should have had a mental health advocate there. There should have been no reason that it wasn't able to be done. And for me, this is something I'm going to examine more because I want to know. I want to know what really happened. Rachel also, to take this a step further, she asked for her treatment tuition, which is what it's called. When people go to treatment, it's like called tuition. She wanted her tuition to be covered, and Bravo refused to pay for it. Bethany says this is because they would be admitting liability. And again, legally, I can't speak to that. That may be the case, but I think that what's interesting for me is that no one is helping Rachel with these costs. Like for me, if Bethany keeps calling everyone out for failing to help her, how is she helping? That's my question. How are you helping? I think Bethany feels like she's helping her just by giving her this platform, which to me again shows a little bit of entitlement because, well, fine, that got her story out there, but it also got her a lot of hate and a lot of vitriol. And oh god, now I'm using that word like crazy. Because I keep hearing Rachel say it. So it's like Rachel getting paid for the interview has been a point of contention. There are people that say, she wasn't paid for the interview, but then Bethany flew to see her, so there wasn't really a cost incurred there. Rachel claimed that she basically didn't make any money on the last season of Vanderpump Rules, but Lisa Vanderpump claims she made over $300,000. We may never know the true nitty gritty of it, but to me, again, I don't like getting lost in the details because it's a way to lose focus and to distract. The point is that Rachel incurred a lot of treatment based on what was aired, or I'm sorry, she incurred a lot of hate, which led to mental health issues, which led her to need to go to treatment. And, do I think that, there should be, Bethany has a ton of money, and if she cares so much about this, then pay her tuition, like put your money where your mouth is. And maybe there's a reason why she can't or won't do that. I don't know. But I do think that if we're going to utilize these reality TV people and we're going to exploit them to an extent and make money off of them, well, they should be paid too. Right? Fair work, fair labor deserves fair payment. And I certainly think there's obviously a wage gap currently in this country, and there's no exceptions on Vanderpump Rules. Rachel talked about not getting paid as much as Tom and Ariana and things like that, and people say, well, she hasn't been there as long, but I mean, you could argue without her, none of this would have happened. I mean, it's terrible to say that, but it's actually true. So it's just very confusing. I think that the last thing I'm going to say on this topic is that I said this in the last episode, but I just want to reiterate it. So in addition to, not getting, paid or whatever that story is and racking up debt, security was not offered to Rachel and her family initially. Bravo or someone has since offered her security now, but she says, well, now, we don't really need the protection. So I just think that as a human being, as an empathetic, caring soul, I do think Rachel got the short end of a lot in terms of how she was treated. So, you may respectfully disagree. I respect your opinions, but I think that, at the end of the day, we can't forget our humanity. And, at the end of the day, we all deserve, to be treated how we want to be treated. And the whole point in what I'm saying right now is like, death threats are not acceptable. Like, we can't get so angry with people that we just threaten their lives or, what have you. That is just totally unacceptable. So, that's kind of my thought on that. Two of the last things that I'm going to talk about, because we're already almost an hour in for this episode, thanks for hanging in there with me, is at the end, Bethany said, "Is this dog thing relevant?" And I was like, I wrote down, dude, are you serious? Is the dog thing relevant? I can't with Bethany's lack of preparation. She knew nothing about the whole dog thing. And I'm like, oh, for the love. But Rachel, addressed it. I'm not going to, beat a dead horse because this has been everywhere. But Rachel claims the Graham had a history of aggression and biting, which was due to James encouraging the dog to bite his hand just because he liked how it felt or something. And when she went to treatment, she was going to rehome Graham, but I guess because Graham bit her mom and it was so severe that it was like down to the bone, they ended up having to research a rescue, which they did. And that apparently was supposed to be anonymous. And then when they saw the microchip, I guess they contacted Lisa Vanderpump, who adopted him. This whole, there's been so much hubbub about all this, but apparently Lisa adopted him, and then Rachel reported feeling that Graham was used as a chip to get her back, which I 1,000% believe to be true. I'm not the biggest LVP fan. I think she's very underhanded. And according to Rachel advocated for Graham and expressed concerns about James not being a fit dog parent. And LVP, she essentially said, use the dog as bait to bring her back. And Lisa allegedly discussed the potential scenes that they could get out of this. And I'm just, this is where reality TV, I just can't. Okay, the last thing that I'm going to talk about is I appreciated, for all the ups and downs, for all the contradictions or inconsistencies or what have you, Rachel did say she regrets it all. She said, I wrote some things down. She said, I would do everything different. I want to acknowledge that I let people down. I broke trust. I'm disappointed in my actions. I was hurting. And I'm going to work hard to make sure I don't ever put myself in this position again. She needed to get caught to hit rock bottom so she could change. And she'll never go back knowing it doesn't support her ultimate goals of being a wonderful person. And, Bethany and Rachel talked about her, trying to be a cycle breaker. And so for me as a therapist, I'm just here for all of that. That is language that I'm sure she would have heard in therapy, in treatment, but to hear it and then to be able to, continue to discuss it and really take it seriously, I will give her credit and support for that. I think the world would be a better place if we all tried to work hard on our stuff to be the best version of ourselves that we can be. So at the end of the day, good for her, for doing that. She'll never come back to reality TV, which tells me that she's taking her mental health extremely seriously. And, she realizes it's not the best place for her to be. So good for her. I hope she heals. I hope she finds, what she's looking for and finds her happiness. And, she finds love and joy and all these great things that humans deserve. So those are my thoughts on that. Thank you so much to everyone for listening to, this very long part 2. And as always, I just want to thank everyone for the support. This is a new podcast and, people have been so supportive and so great. I appreciate you all so much. Please head over to my YouTube channel where you can see the video of this podcast. And, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and the podcast. You can also find all the links to any podcast I've ever done, including my own, on my Instagram page, which is Your Bish Therapist. So to close it out, what I'm going to do is read my disclaimer, and then we'll talk about a little bit what I'm going to talk about next episode. Disclaimer: posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT Podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on Your Bish Therapist podcast or associated social media. Communicating with Your Bish Therapist via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of Your Bish Therapist, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback. Oh, sorry, that's a mouthful. So next episode, I am going to follow up about all of this after I get some of your feedback. And I plan to talk about some things outside of Bravo. I had some ideas to talk about the Murdaugh murders, and I've kind of been really obsessed with that. The whole situation with the Duggars, John and Kate +8. So I am definitely going to, in the next couple episodes, talk about some non-Bravo related things. But of course, if breaking news comes up, I will have to serve clinical interpretation. So thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate you very much. Until next time, this is your Bish Therapist signing off. Bye-bye.